The cafeteria floor shook as Dylan Matthews flew backward through the air. His muscular frame twisted like a broken marionette, arms flailing wildly, face frozen in pure terror. 300 students stood paralyzed forks halfway to their mouths, watching as Oak Ridge High's most feared football star crashed through a lunch table. The crack of splintering wood echoed off the walls. Emma Reynolds stood perfectly still at the center of it all. Her small frame barely moved, one hand still raised in a defensive position. Dark hair falling over her face like a curtain. Red marinara sauce dripped from her black hoodie onto the white linoleum floor. Drop, drop, drop. The only sound in the massive room. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Nobody could believe what they had just witnessed. The ghost girl, the one who never spoke, never fought back, never even made eye contact, had just destroyed Dylan Matthews in 2.3 seconds flat. Principal Morrison would later claim he reviewed the security footage 17 times before he could process what had happened. The small, silent girl who had endured 3 years of daily torment had moved with such fluid precision that it defied physics. One moment, sitting covered in pasta and humiliation. The next, standing with Dylan's wrist locked in a grip that military experts would later identify as a technique taught only to Special Forces operators. What no one in that cafeteria knew was that they weren't witnessing a victim's breaking point. They were seeing the first calculated move in a war that had been brewing for 7 long years. A war planned by a ghost against an enemy none of them understood. A war that would uncover secrets buried since the Cold War and reveal a darkness at the heart of their dying logging town. Oak Ridge, Oregon sat nestled between pine-covered mountains, a place where fog rolled in each morning like nature's shroud. Once a booming lumber town with 3 active mills running day and night, it had decayed slowly as operations shut down. Now, the main street featured more vacant storefronts than businesses, and the population sign at the town limits hadn't been updated in 15 years, its promise of 200 residents a fading echo of better days. Most young people left as soon as they graduated. Those who remained either couldn't escape or were third-generation loggers too stubborn to abandon their heritage. The exception to this economic decline sat on the northern edge of town, the gleaming Riverdale Psychiatric Institute, whose modern glass and steel structure seemed to mock the weathered clapboard buildings surrounding it. Jake Holloway noticed this contrast on his first day in town, watching from the passenger seat of his uncle's pickup truck as they drove past the Institute's manicured grounds. "That place doesn't belong here," he said, eyeing the security cameras mounted on sleek posts along the perimeter fence. His Uncle Robert, a former Army Ranger who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before settling in Oak Ridge, merely grunted in agreement. "Town was dying until Dr. Blackwood built that place 10 years ago, brought in jobs specialists grant money. Folks here don't ask questions when their bellies are full." Jake had moved in with his uncle after his parents' divorce turned ugly in Portland. At 17, he was tall but lanky, with observant eyes that missed little. His father had been a military brat who rebelled against structure while his mother came from old Portland money. Their marriage had been doomed from the start. Neither parent had fought for custody when Jake suggested living with his uncle to finish his senior year somewhere quiet. Oak Ridge High School looked exactly as Jake had expected, a 2-story brick building with faded championship banners and a football field that received more groundskeeping attention than the academic wings. On his first day, he kept his head down, navigating the usual hierarchies present in any school. The jocks ruled here, led by Dylan Matthews, a senior with college scouts already circling. The teachers deferred to him subtly, hallways parted for him, and even the principal seemed to laugh too hard at his jokes. Jake first saw Emma Reynolds in third-period history. She sat alone in the back corner, hoodie pulled up despite school rules, eyes fixed on her notebook. What struck him wasn't her isolation. Every school had loners, but her stillness. She didn't fidget, didn't shift position, didn't even seem to blink at regular intervals. It was the economy of movement he recognized from his uncle and other veterans, the conservation of energy, the constant awareness of surroundings without appearing to observe. "That's Ghost Girl," whispered Marissa, his assigned student guide following his gaze. "Emma Reynolds. Doesn't talk, doesn't have friends, doesn't do anything except take perfect notes and ace every test." "Why Ghost Girl?" Jake asked. "Because she might as well not exist. Been here 3 years, and I've heard her speak maybe twice. Total weirdo." Jake nodded, but kept watching. When Emma finally moved to turn a page, the motion was precise, efficient. No wasted energy. Just like his uncle cleaning his service weapon or packing a rucksack. This wasn't social anxiety. This was training. At lunch, Jake witnessed the routine everyone else had apparently grown desensitized to. Dylan Matthews and his football teammates circled Emma's isolated table like sharks. Dylan carried an overloaded tray of spaghetti marinara sauce, sloshing dangerously close to the edges. "Daily shower time for Ghost Girl," he announced, voice booming across the cafeteria. The spaghetti cascaded down like a red waterfall, coating Emma's black hoodie, her notebook her untouched apple. She didn't flinch. She never did. Just sat there, sauce dripping down her face, eyes fixed on the same spot on the table. The football players laughed, high-fiving each other as they sauntered away. No teacher intervened. No student offered help. It was a scene that had played out so many times, it had lost its shock value to everyone except Jake. As the cafeteria returned to its normal buzz, Jake grabbed some napkins and approached Emma's table. Before he could offer them, her voice stopped him, low, controlled, with the measured cadence of someone choosing each word with precision. "Don't." That single word carried weight. Not embarrassment or victim's shame, but command. Jake stood frozen, napkins in hand. "They're watching," she continued without looking up. "Helping makes you a target." Jake glanced around and noticed Dylan's friends monitoring the interaction from across the room. "I'm not afraid of those meatheads." Now she looked up, and Jake saw her eyes clearly for the first time. Dark, intelligent, and utterly calm, despite the sauce dripping from her chin. "You should be. This isn't normal bullying. This is systematic psychological destruction overseen by a medical professional." Before Jake could respond, Emma gathered her sauce-covered notebook, stood with fluid grace, and walked out, leaving red footprints in her wake. The precision of her movement reminded Jake again of his uncle economy of motion, situational awareness, tactical withdrawal. That night, Jake mentioned the incident to his uncle as they cleaned up after dinner. "Emma Reynolds," Robert repeated, pausing with a dish in hand. "Frank Reynolds' granddaughter. Don't know her family. Everyone calls her Ghost Girl. Gets bullied pretty badly." Robert set the dish down carefully. Frank Reynolds was a legend. Master Chief Navy SEALs, one of the best hand-to-hand combat instructors the team's ever had. Retired here about 15 years ago to raise his granddaughter after her parents died. What happened to him? Training accident, supposedly. 7 years back. Was teaching some new close-quarters technique at the Reserve Center in Portland. Something went wrong. Robert's voice had the careful neutrality that Jake recognized as his uncle, hiding something. Emma was what 10 then, moved away with her grandmother for a while, then came back. Keep an eye on her, Jake. Frank was a good man. Deserved better than what happened. Jake would have pressed for more, but his uncle's closed expression said the conversation was over. That night, he researched Frank Reynolds online, finding only brief mentions in military publications, and a short obituary noting his distinguished 24-year career in naval special warfare and surviving family members. The next day at school, Jake paid closer attention to Emma. She moved through crowded hallways without touching anyone, always aware of exit routes, always positioned with her back to walls. In gym class, she participated minimally deliberately, underperforming, while occasionally revealing flashes of exceptional balance and coordination that she quickly disguised. During lunch, Jake sat where he could observe both Emma and Dylan. The football star's behavior seemed performative, almost clinical. He didn't bully randomly, he selected targets, carefully escalated methodically, and always watched for reactions with analytical interest, rather than typical teenage cruelty. After school, Jake followed Emma at a distance. Instead of heading home, she walked to a rundown gas station on the edge of town. The faded sign read, "Winter's Fuel and Service," though half the pumps were out of order. Emma disappeared inside for 20 minutes, then emerged and continued to a modest single-story house on Oak Ridge's east side. The following day, Jake visited the gas station alone. Behind the counter stood an old man with leathery skin and the ramrod posture of military service. The name tag pinned to his oil-stained coveralls read, "Samuel." "Help you, son." The old man's eyes were sharp, assessing. "Just browsing," Jake said, pretending interest in the sparse selection of snacks. "New in town, staying with my Uncle Robert Holloway." Samuel's expression shifted slightly. "Bobby's nephew. He was Force Recon, right?" "Army Ranger." "That's right, good man." Samuel seemed to come to a decision. "You're the new kid watching Emma Reynolds." It wasn't a question. Jake abandoned pretense. "You know her." "Known her since she was born. Known her grandfather longer." Samuel's weathered face softened. "Frank was my best friend. Served together in Desert Storm before he went the SEAL route, and I stayed conventional Navy. My uncle mentioned a training accident." Samuel's eyes darted to the security camera in the corner, then back to Jake. "That, what they call it now? Interesting." He busied himself organizing items behind the counter. "Emma comes by every Tuesday and Thursday. Helps me with inventory and computer stuff. Smart girl. Too smart to talk much in this town. She gets bullied pretty badly at school. By Dylan Matthews. Nathan Blackwood's boy." Samuel nodded, as if this explained everything. "You seem concerned. That's good. Emma needs allies, even if she doesn't think so." He reached below the counter and pulled out a faded photograph, sliding it across to Jake. The photo showed two men in desert camouflage arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a helicopter. One was clearly a younger Samuel. The other was tall with the compact muscularity of special operators, his face creased in a rare smile. "That's Frank," Samuel said. "Best combat instructor I ever met. Could kill you 6 ways with his pinky finger, but never met a gentler soul with his family. Started teaching Emma self-defense when she was 6. By 12, that girl could dismantle grown men." "Then why does she let Dylan torment her?" Samuel reclaimed the photo, tucking it carefully away. "After Frank died, Emma's grandmother forbade any fighting. Said violence had taken everything from their family. Made Emma promise to bury that part of herself." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "But some things can't stay buried forever, son. And Dylan Matthews has been digging his own grave for 3 years now." Before Jake could ask what he meant, the bell above the door jingled as another customer entered. Samuel straightened his expression, closing. "Pleasure meeting you, Jake Holloway. Tell your Uncle Sam Winters says hello." Over the next week, Jake observed Emma with new context. What he had mistaken for passivity was monastic self-control. The precision in her movements wasn't social awkwardness, but ingrained tactical training she was deliberately suppressing. Once, when a textbook fell from a shelf nearly striking her, her hand moved with blinding speed to catch it, before she deliberately fumbled and let it hit the floor. Anyway, eyes darting around to see if anyone had noticed. Jake had, and so had Dylan Matthews. The bullying escalated. Dylan accidentally spilled chemicals on Emma's lab project. His girlfriend, Heather, spread rumors about Emma self-harming. His teammates blocked her path in hallways, forcing her to arrive late to classes. Through it all, Emma maintained her silent composure, though Jake occasionally caught micro-expressions of calculated assessment crossing her face, not the reaction of a victim, but of a strategist gathering intelligence. Then came the day in the cafeteria that changed everything. The spaghetti shower began as usual. Dylan's announcement, the red cascade, the silent endurance. But this time Dylan did something new. His hand moved forward ostensibly to help clean the mess, but his fingers deliberately pressed against Emma's chest, squeezing through the soaked fabric. His mouth moved close to her ear. "Your grandpa can't save you now," he whispered loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The cafeteria fell silent at this escalation, this line crossed. Emma's eyes, usually downcast and empty, snapped open. Not with fear or shame, with cold, calculated recognition. The moment she had been waiting for. Her body moved with fluid precision, hand intercepting Dylan's wrist with surgical accuracy. The movement flowed like water. Lock, rotate, apply pressure to the radial nerve. 2.3 seconds. That's all it took for Oak Ridge High's untouchable football star to go from predator to prey. His arm bent at an angle arms weren't meant to bend. The scream that tore from his throat sounded more animal than human as his body flew through the air, crashing through the lunch table behind him. Emma stood perfectly still, in the aftermath sauce, still dripping from her clothes, watching Dylan with unreadable eyes. When security finally arrived, she simply held out her wrists, ready for the consequences she had calculated years ago. Principal Morrison's office smelled of cheap air freshener and educational bureaucracy. Emma sat motionless in the visitor's chair, still covered in drying marinara sauce, while Morrison paced behind his desk. Her posture remained perfect, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, face impassive. 3 years without a single disciplinary incident, Morrison said, waving her spotless record. Perfect attendance, perfect grades, and now this. He gestured at the security monitor, still showing the frozen image of Dylan sprawled amid broken table pieces. His father is on the school board, Emma, the chief of psychiatry at Riverdale. Do you understand the position you've put me in? Emma's voice, when she finally spoke, was measured and clear. Dylan sexually assaulted me in front of 300 witnesses and 17 security cameras. The position I've put you in is having to decide whether you'll uphold the law or protect a predator because his father donates to the athletic department. Morrison's face flushed. That's not he didn't. He composed himself. Dr. Blackwood is already saying Dylan was trying to help clean you up, that you overreacted due to past trauma. He's concerned about your mental state, Emma. I'm sure he is. No inflection, no emotion. 3 days suspension pending further investigation. Morrison finally declared. Your grandmother has been called to pick you up. Emma nodded once, as if this outcome had been precisely what she expected. Outside the office, Jake waited by the water fountain. He'd witnessed everything in the cafeteria and followed when security escorted Emma away. She emerged from Morrison's office and walked past without acknowledging him, but her pace slowed just enough for him to fall in beside her. That was Sistema, he said quietly. Russian military combat system. My uncle trained with the guy who studied it. Emma kept walking, eyes forward. Modification of it. My grandfather preferred to integrate techniques rather than follow any pure form. Why now? After 3 years of taking his abuse. Because now there are witnesses to sexual assault, not just bullying. Her voice remained clinical, detached. Morrison can bury a food fight. The school board can dismiss psychological torment. But sexual assault on camera with 300 witnesses, that creates legal exposure they can't ignore. They reached the school entrance, where a worn Toyota Camry waited an older woman with worried eyes behind the wheel. Emma finally turned to face Jake directly. "You've been watching me, asking questions, talking to Samuel Winters." It wasn't a question. Why? Because something's wrong with this town, with that kid Dylan, with how everyone pretends not to see what happens to you. Emma studied him for a long moment. Oak Creek Bridge, the old railroad trestle north of town, 7 p.m. tonight. She walked away without waiting for a response, sliding into the passenger seat of the Camry. Jake watched them drive away, noticing how Emma's grandmother kept glancing nervously at her sauce-covered granddaughter, her lips moving in what appeared to be worried admonishments. Emma sat in perfect stillness, staring straight ahead, the ghost girl once more. That evening, Jake borrowed his uncle's truck and drove to the abandoned railroad bridge spanning Oak Creek. The structure had been out of use for decades, its wooden ties weathered gray by countless Oregon winters. Emma was already there, sitting on the edge with her legs dangling 40 feet above the rushing water. She had changed into clean clothes, dark cargo pants, and a fitted black thermal shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. Without the oversized hoodie, Jake could see the athletic build she normally concealed beneath baggy clothing. "You came alone," she observed as he approached, not turning around. "Should I have brought backup?" "Most would have." She patted the weathered wood beside her. "Your uncle didn't warn you about me." Jake sat carefully. "He respects your grandfather. Didn't say much else." Emma nodded, eyes on the creek below. "Frank Reynolds taught me everything he knew from age 6. By 12, I could disarm opponents twice my size. By 13, I could target nerve clusters and pressure points that could temporarily paralyze or cause excruciating pain without leaving marks." She spoke with the same detachment one might use to discuss the weather. 3 months before he died, I broke 3 of his ribs during training with a single strike. He laughed it off, said I was getting too good. "What really happened to him?" Jake asked. "According to the official report, equipment malfunction during a demonstration at the Reserve Center." Reality. He discovered something he wasn't supposed to know about a program called Chimera, a Cold War psychological warfare project supposedly shuttered in 1989 but secretly continued by certain interested parties. She pulled a worn military dog tag from beneath her shirt, running her thumb over the embossed letters. "Before he died, my grandfather gave me 2 things, these tags and a mission. Watch, document, wait for them to make a mistake. For 3 years, I've done exactly that." "Them? You mean Dylan and his father?" "Dylan is just a prototype. Dr. Nathan Blackwood was a military psychiatrist before opening Riverdale Institute. Specializes in behavioral modification through systematic psychological pressure. His son is his star pupil and research assistant." She turned to face Jake fully. "For 3 years, Dylan has been tormenting selected students under his father's direction, documenting responses, testing breakpoints, refining techniques. I'm not his victim. I'm his most challenging test subject, the one who never breaks. Until today. Until he provided the perfect documented offense that can't be buried." She pulled a small device from her pocket, a modified smartphone with additional components attached. "I've been collecting evidence since freshman year. Every incident, every victim, every cover-up. The school security system has more back doors than a carnival funhouse, thanks to Noah Jang's hacking skills. Why are you telling me this? Emma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes assessed him with military precision. Because tomorrow, everything changes. Dr. Blackwood has been running an unauthorized continuation of Project Chimera across 17 schools nationwide, using his son and other selected students to develop psychological warfare techniques for breaking resistance without leaving physical evidence. My grandfather discovered this 7 years ago and tried to expose it. They killed him for it. She stood in one fluid motion. The question, Jake Holloway, is whether you want to be part of what happens next. Jake stood as well, feeling the weight of generations of military service in his family, line, his uncle, his grandfather, who died in Vietnam, his great-grandfather at Normandy. What do you need me to do? Meet me at Samuel's gas station tomorrow after school. Bring a backpack with overnight supplies. She turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. Watch out for Hunter Matthews, Dylan's brother, the freshman. He's been helping me gather evidence from his father's office. If they discover what he's done, he'll need extraction. As Jake watched her walk away, the realization crystallized that Emma Reynolds wasn't just a bullied teenager with combat training. She was a strategist, executing a years-long mission of justice or vengeance with the precision her grandfather had instilled in her. The following day at school, Dylan Matthews was conspicuously absent. Rumors swirled about his condition: broken arm, nerve damage, potential surgery. His football teammates seemed subdued, casting nervous glances at Emma's empty seat in shared classes. Without their leader, they appeared uncertain how to proceed, like soldiers who had lost their commanding officer. After final bell, Jake met Noah Jang in the computer lab, a thin, nervous sophomore with thick glasses and perpetually shaking hands. Noah had approached Jake between classes, whispering that she had instructed him to share certain files. "I've been helping her for 2 years," Noah explained, voice barely audible as his fingers flew across the keyboard. "At first, I just wanted the bullying to stop. Dylan locked me in the janitor's closet overnight freshman year. When they found me the next morning, Dr. Blackwood convinced everyone I'd done it myself for attention." The screen filled with folders labeled by date and incident type. Video clips, audio recordings, photographs, and transcribed conversations, a meticulously organized archive of systematic abuse. Emma started collecting evidence after the first month of freshman year, Noah continued, at first just documenting what happened to her. Then she noticed patterns: how Dylan selected targets, how incidents escalated in specific increments, how he recorded reactions. She found a hidden camera in his backpack. Noah opened a video file showing Dylan in what appeared to be a home office, speaking with an older man who shared his strong jawline and cold eyes. Subject 23 showed increased anxiety responses after 3 weeks of sustained pressure. Dr. Blackwood was saying, reviewing notes, "The isolation techniques you employed were particularly effective. Response patterns indicate approaching psychological breakpoint." "The Mitchell girl still has some resistance," Dylan replied. "Her father's position as sheriff provides social insulation. Focus on severing those support systems first. Remember, a subject with perceived authority, protection requires different approach vectors. Document her response to public humiliation tomorrow." Noah closed the file. "There are hundreds of these. Strategy sessions, planning analysis. They're experimenting on students, Jake. And Emma's been documenting all of it. Why not go to the police?" Sheriff Mitchell's daughter, Lisa, was subject 14. After she finally broke and reported the bullying, her father received a donation to his re-election campaign from Riverdale Institute. The complaint disappeared. Noah pushed his glasses up nervously. Emma says we need irrefutable evidence and the right allies before moving. Today was the trigger event. After leaving Noah, Jake headed to Winters's gas station as instructed. He found Emma and Samuel Winters in the garage behind the main building, surrounded by maps and equipment that seemed out of place in a simple service station. Right on time. Samuel nodded approvingly, spreading a topographical map across a workbench. Emma says you're in. That means you need to know everything. The map showed the forest surrounding Oak Ridge with locations marked in military grid coordinates. Samuel pointed to a spot 3 miles north of town. Frank built a fallback position here after retiring. Nothing fancy concrete bunker with supplies, communications equipment, defensible approaches. When he started investigating Chimera, he knew they might come for him eventually. How do you know all this? Jake asked. Samuel's weathered face hardened. Because I was there the day Frank died. It wasn't a training accident. They made it look that way after I was knocked unconscious. When I came to and started asking questions, Dr. Blackwood personally explained how my history of TBI from Desert Storm might be causing memory issues and paranoid ideation, offered free treatment at Riverdale. When I refused, I suddenly had tax problems, permit issues with this place, and a visit from sheriff's deputies finding prescription meds that weren't mine. They tried to silence you, too. They did silence me, for years. Samuel's eyes shifted to Emma. Until this one showed up freshman year, asking the right questions. Frank had trained her well, not just in fighting, but in strategy. Sometimes you win by not fighting at all, he used to say. By letting the enemy think they've won until they get careless. Emma checked her watch. We need to move. Hunter's last message said his father is reviewing security footage from the cafeteria incident repeatedly. If he identifies the exact technique I used, he'll make the connection to Frank's training. The three of them loaded Samuel's old Jeep with supplies, including a laptop communication equipment and what Jake recognized as a go bag with survival essentials. As they prepared to leave, Emma's phone chimed with an encrypted message. It's Hunter, she said, reading quickly. His father just ordered a psychological evaluation for me, claiming the cafeteria incident shows signs of violent dissociative episode consistent with PTSD. He's pushing for temporary commitment to Riverdale for observation. They're moving faster than we expected, Samuel muttered. No, Emma corrected her voice, carrying the certainty of someone who had planned for every contingency. They're moving exactly as predicted. Phase 2 begins now. They drove into the mountains as dusk settled over the forest, following logging roads that grew progressively rougher. After parking in a hidden turnout, they continued on foot for half a mile along a nearly invisible trail. Frank Reynolds's bunker was disguised as an abandoned mining operation, its entrance concealed by strategic placement of native vegetation. Inside the space was smaller than Jake had imagined, but meticulously organized. One wall held communications equipment, another displayed maps and photographs connected by red string, and a third contained weapons secured in locked cabinets. A table in the center held a detailed model of Oak Ridge with key buildings marked including Riverdale Institute. My grandfather built this place as both refuge and command center, Emma explained, powering up the systems. After he died, my grandmother forbade me from coming here, said it would feed unhealthy obsessions. When we moved back to Oak Ridge 3 years ago, I found it untouched, waiting. Samuel began checking the communications equipment, while Emma connected her devices to a central computer. Jake examined the wall of evidence photographs of Dr. Blackwood with military officials' documents partially redacted but showing Project Chimera headers maps of facilities across the country. "What exactly was Project Chimera?" he asked. Emma didn't look up from her work. "Official designation: Enhanced Psychological Resilience and Resistance Reduction Protocols. Developed during late Cold War to create more effective interrogation and compliance techniques. Officially terminated in 1989 when congressional investigations into military psychological programs began heating up. Unofficially continued under various civilian research grants focused on adolescent behavioral modification." She projected a document onto the wall, a research paper authored by Dr. Nathan Blackwood 20 years earlier. Developmental applications of structured psychological pressure-building compliance through systematic resistance reduction in adolescent subjects. "They're experimenting on kids." Jake felt his stomach turn. "Why, adolescents are ideal subjects," Emma recited as if quoting directly from Blackwood's work. "Their social hierarchies provide natural control environments. Their need for peer acceptance creates exploitable vulnerabilities. Their developing identity structures can be more easily reformed." She finally looked up. "And because no one listens to teenagers, we're either dramatic, hormonal attention-seeking or mentally unstable. The perfect test population." Samuel joined them, wiping his hands on a rag. Frank discovered they were using Dylan as both subject and operator, training him to systematically break down other students, recording responses, refining techniques, using the data to develop next-generation psychological warfare methods. But why involve his own son? "Because Dylan was the perfect candidate," Emma answered. "Athletic, socially dominant, intellectually capable, and completely under his father's influence since his mother died. Dr. Blackwood has been molding him since childhood, training him to identify weaknesses, apply precise pressure, and document results." She pulled up video of Dylan methodically tormenting different students, his expression clinical rather than cruel. In each case, he would return home and report to his father, discussing reactions and effectiveness with the detachment of lab scientists. "What about Hunter Dillon's brother?" "Different mother, different temperament," Samuel explained. "When Hunter started high school last year, Blackwood began grooming him as the next operator. But the kid has empathy his brother lacks. Started asking questions. Eventually found Emma and offered to help." Emma checked an encrypted messaging app. "Hunter's last update says his father is reviewing my file. 7 years of psychological assessments, incident reports, behavioral observations. 3 years of apparent passivity despite sustained psychological pressure." "You've been his most challenging subject," Jake realized. "The one who never breaks." Until today. Emma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a cold determination. "Now I'm his worst nightmare, the subject who breaks in a way he never anticipated with skills he thought were buried. The connection to my grandfather that he's worked so hard to conceal is now front and center." Samuel switched on a police scanner, adjusting frequencies. "If Blackwood moves to have you committed to Riverdale, we don't have much time." "He won't do that immediately," Emma countered. "First, he'll try to control the narrative, claim I'm unstable, dangerous, turn public opinion against me before making his move." She pulled up a new file on the computer. "Which is exactly what we want." The screen showed a complex flowchart of contingency plans, decision trees, and response protocols, a strategic battle plan years in the making. Jake recognized military planning methodology, the same approach his uncle had described from combat operations planning. "Tomorrow," Emma continued, "Noah releases the first video evidence, Dylan and his father discussing psychological breaking points of specific students. Jake, you'll need to return to school as if nothing has happened. Watch for reactions, particularly from Hunter. He'll be vulnerable now. What about you? I'll be exactly where Blackwood expects at home, with my overprotective grandmother, apparently traumatized by my own violent outburst. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Emma's lips. While actually executing the next phase of an operation, my grandfather began planning 7 years ago. The media storm that descended upon Oak Ridge transformed the dying lumber town overnight. News vans clogged Main Street, satellite dishes sprouted like metal mushrooms in the high school parking lot, and FBI agents in dark suits conducted interviews in the same diner where generations of loggers had once gathered for pre-dawn coffee. National headlines screamed about psychological warfare on American teenagers and Cold War experiments in high school hallways. Through it all, Emma Reynolds maintained her tactical discipline. She declined all interview requests, provided written statements only to official investigators, and continued attending classes with the same quiet precision she had demonstrated for 3 years. The only visible change was the absence of her oversized hoodie and the presence of her grandfather's dog tags hanging openly around her neck. "You could be on every morning show in America," Jake observed as they sat in the school library during lunch period, avoiding the still chaotic cafeteria where Emma's takedown of Dylan had been replayed on national news. "Operational security remains in effect," she replied without looking up from her calculus homework. "Media exposure creates vulnerabilities. Project Phoenix had protection at levels we haven't yet identified." 3 days had passed since the FBI raids. Dr. Nathan Blackwood and 7 associates from Riverdale Institute remained in federal custody, denied bail due to flight risk and the severity of charges. Dylan Matthews had been transferred to a specialized juvenile rehabilitation facility in Portland. Hunter Matthews was staying with his maternal aunt under protective witness status. "The FBI says they've secured all the evidence," Jake persisted. 17 schools, 43 psychiatrists involved, hundreds of victims identified. "It's over, Emma." She finally looked up, her dark eyes assessing him with the same tactical precision she applied to everything. "My grandfather identified Project Chimera in 2016, 7 years ago. He believed it had been operational since at least 1992, despite official termination in 1989. That's 27 years of undetected psychological warfare research conducted on American soil using American children as test subjects." She closed her textbook with deliberate care. "It isn't over, Jake. We've exposed one operational node. The network remains." Before Jake could respond, Noah Jang appeared between the library shelves, his thin face flushed with excitement. The sophomore had emerged from the shadows following the raids, his role in hacking school systems and securing evidence earning him a mixture of awe and wariness from classmates. "They found something at the abandoned sawmill," he whispered, sliding into a chair beside them. "FBI forensic team discovered a hidden room beneath the main floor. Some kind of auxiliary research facility." Emma showed no surprise. "Records equipment." "Both. Agent Chen wants to speak with you. Says they found documents mentioning your grandfather specifically." Jake studied Emma's face, searching for some emotional reaction, grief, vindication, anger, but found only the same tactical assessment she brought to every situation. 3 years of maintaining deep cover had honed her ability to suppress normal teenage responses. "Tell Agent Chen I'll meet her at 1600 hours at Samuel's gas station," Emma directed. "Less visibility than the school or my home." Noah nodded and departed as quietly as he had arrived, leaving Jake alone with Emma once more. "You knew about the sawmill facility," he realized. "Suspected. Couldn't confirm without compromising my cover." She began methodically organizing her study materials. The old Cascade lumber mill closed in 2010, Blackwood purchased it through a shell company in 2012, shortly after establishing Riverdale. My grandfather noted increased activity there in his journals. What do you think they found? Based on operational patterns, likely a secondary testing facility for more advanced Phoenix protocols. The subjects who disappeared from the program, the ones Dylan broke, who subsequently transferred schools, some may have been moved there for extended study. The clinical detachment with which she discussed the possibility of imprisoned teenagers sent a chill through Jake. How can you be so calm about all this? For a brief moment, something flickered behind Emma's eyes, a glimpse of the 17-year-old girl beneath the tactical operator. I haven't been calm since I was 13, Jake. I've been focused. She stood shouldering her backpack. Focus is how you survive when the world stops making sense. It's how you function when you discover adults are using children as psychological test subjects. It's how you maintain when the man who trained you to defend yourself is murdered for trying to stop it. The raw emotion in her voice vanished as quickly as it had appeared, tactical discipline reasserting itself. I'll report any relevant findings from Agent Chen. Maintain normal operations until then. She walked away with the same measured steps that had once marked her as the school outcast, now recognized by everyone as the controlled movements of someone with military training. As she passed a group of football players who had once been Dylan's lieutenants, they pressed themselves against the wall, eyes downcast. Not from bullying power, but from the quiet recognition that the ghost they had tormented could have destroyed them at any moment during the past 3 years, and had chosen not to. Samuel Winters's gas station had become an unlikely hub in the ongoing investigation. The FBI had established a secondary command post in the garage bay, recognizing both its strategic location on the edge of town and Samuel's connection to Frank Reynolds. At exactly 4:00 p.m., Emma arrived to find Agent Sarah Chen waiting beside a table covered with evidence bags and photographs. "Miss Reynolds?" Chen nodded in greeting. The FBI agent was in her 40s with the precise movements and assessing gaze of someone with military background before joining the bureau. "Thank you for continuing to assist our investigation." "You found my grandfather's research at the sawmill," Emma stated, rather than asked. Chen studied her for a moment, then gestured to the materials spread across the table. Frank Reynolds was more thorough than anyone realized. He didn't just identify Project Chimera, he mapped its entire evolution into Phoenix, documented key personnel, and tracked funding sources through multiple shells and defense contractors. She indicated a photograph of a hidden room beneath the sawmill walls covered with maps. Photographs and documents connected by red string in a pattern eerily similar to Emma's own evidence wall in the bunker. "Your grandfather created a parallel investigation to the one you conducted," Chen continued. "Different location, different security protocols, but the same objective. We believe he maintained this facility without Dr. Blackwood's knowledge. Until something compromised him," Emma observed, examining the photographs with clinical detachment. "Yes." Chen opened a file folder. "According to documents we recovered from Blackwood's private server, Frank's investigation was discovered approximately 2 weeks before his death. Not the sawmill location, but evidence that he was accessing classified Chimera files through former military contacts." Samuel Winters emerged from the garage office, wiping his hands on a shop rag. The old veteran had provided his space to the FBI, willingly finding purpose in contributing to the investigation that would vindicate his fallen friend. "They used Hadley," Samuel said, his weathered face grim. "Lieutenant Commander James Hadley. He and Frank served together in the teams. Blackwood recruited him to ensure the accident went as planned." Chen nodded confirmation. "Hadley is currently being detained at Naval Base Kitsap. He's cooperating in exchange for consideration during sentencing." Emma absorbed this information with the same tactical calm she applied to everything, though her hand moved unconsciously to her grandfather's dog tags. What else was found at the sawmill? Chen hesitated, exchanging glances with Samuel, who nodded slightly. Evidence of Phoenix protocols beyond what was conducted at the schools, she finally said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine disgust. The 17 schools were Phase 1, identifying susceptible subjects and effective operators through standard bullying scenarios. The sawmill facility was Phase 2, intensive application of refined techniques on selected subjects. The students who disappeared after Dylan broke them, Emma concluded. The ones who supposedly transferred to other districts. Some did transfer, Chen confirmed. Others were brought to the sawmill facility for weeks or months of specialized therapy before being relocated to controlled environments. We've identified 17 former Oak Ridge students who went through this process over the past 5 years. Samuel placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder, the first time anyone had touched her with genuine compassion in years. They were creating programmable assets, kid. Using techniques your grandfather helped develop for battlefield interrogation modified for long-term civilian application. Emma's expression remained neutral, but Jake, who had arrived moments earlier, noticed the slight tightening of her jaw, the only visible sign of her emotional response to this confirmation of something worse than even she had suspected. Phase 3, she asked, her voice steady. Chen closed the file folder. We're still piecing that together. References in Blackwood's journal suggest placement of graduated subjects in strategic positions, universities' military recruitment, political campaigns. Long-term sleeper assets conditioned to respond to specific triggers. MKUltra for the social media generation, Samuel muttered darkly. We're tracking down every individual connected to the program, Chen assured them. But we need your continued assistance, Miss Reynolds. Your grandfather's documentation, combined with your 3 years of evidence, provides the most comprehensive picture of Phoenix operations. Emma nodded once. I'll cooperate fully, Agent Chen. However, I believe there's still an active element of the network you haven't identified. What makes you say that? Pattern recognition. Project Phoenix represents billions in black-budget research and decades of refinement. Dr. Blackwood was a significant operational node, but not the architect. Someone higher in the chain remains active. Chen studied her with newfound respect. You've been monitoring communication patterns since the raid. It wasn't a question. Emma merely inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement. Noah Jiang maintains surveillance of relevant digital channels, she explained. There's been encrypted traffic between multiple military contractors associated with Phoenix funding. Content unknown, but timing and frequency suggest contingency protocols activated by Blackwood's arrest. You should be working for us, Chen observed with a slight smile. I am, Emma replied without emotion. Until my grandfather's mission is complete. After the meeting concluded, Jake walked with Emma toward her home, processing the revelations about the sawmill facility. The autumn afternoon was fading into evening, painting the dying logging town in shades of orange and gold that belied the darkness they had uncovered. How are you really doing with all this? He finally asked. Not tactical Emma, but the real you underneath. She continued walking for several paces before responding. There is no separation, Jake, not anymore. Tactical assessment is how I process everything now. She glanced at him briefly. My grandmother tried to force me to bury that part of myself after Frank died, to be a normal teenager who experienced emotions without analysis, who reacted without calculation. It nearly destroyed me. So you became the ghost instead. I became what I needed to be to complete the mission. They reached the modest single-story house where Emma lived with her grandmother. Frank used to say, "The mission changes you." The question is whether you direct that change or let it direct you. Before Jake could respond, Emma's grandmother appeared on the front porch, a tired-looking woman in her 60s whose face had aged beyond her years. Since the FBI raids and subsequent revelations, Marianne Reynolds had seemed perpetually shell-shocked, her belief that she had protected her granddaughter by forbidding her training shattered by the reality of what Emma had endured and accomplished. "There's someone here to see you," she called, her voice strained. "From Washington." Emma's posture shifted subtly, combat readiness disguised as casual alertness. "Expected. Agent Chen called ahead," her grandmother replied. "Says he knew your grandfather." With a quick glance at Jake that conveyed both caution and inclusion, Emma led the way into the house. In the modest living room, a tall man in his 60s stood examining a photograph of Frank Reynolds in dress uniform. Despite his civilian clothes, an expensive suit that seemed out of place in Oak Ridge, he carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. "Emma Reynolds," he said, turning to face them. "You look just like your grandfather. Same tactical assessment in your eyes." He extended his hand. "Admiral James Hargrove, Naval Special Warfare Command, retired. I served with Frank in 3 theaters." Emma didn't take the offered hand. "You were his commanding officer during Operation Phantom Sentinel, the operation where Chimera protocols were first field-tested." If Hargrove was surprised by her knowledge, he didn't show it. "Frank taught you well." "Yes, I oversaw those deployments. Your grandfather was instrumental in developing the resistance training that protected our operators from enemy application of similar techniques." "Why are you here, Admiral?" Emma's voice remained neutral, but Jake noticed her slight repositioning, maintaining optimal distance, calculating angles, preparing for contingencies. Hargrove gestured to the couch. "May we sit? What I have to share requires some context." Emma remained standing. "I prefer tactical clarity, sir. Direct approach." A smile flickered across the Admiral's face. "Just like Frank." He straightened, matching her formality. "I'm here because what you've uncovered goes beyond Dr. Blackwood and Project Phoenix. Frank realized this 7 years ago and tried to alert me, but his message was intercepted. By the time I became aware of his concerns, he was already dead." "Convenient timing," Emma observed coldly. "Deliberately so," Hargrove acknowledged. "There's a faction within military intelligence that believes psychological warfare techniques developed for battlefield application have domestic uses. Population management, they call it. Preemptive compliance conditioning. Frank discovered their unauthorized adaptation of his resistance training protocols for civilian application. Project Chimera became Phoenix," Jake interjected, following the thread. "Precisely, young man. What began as defensive training to protect our operators from enemy psychological tactics evolved into offensive application. First against hostile combatants, then expanded to civilian threat populations, and finally, he gestured around them indicating Oak Ridge itself, tested on American soil against American citizens. With your knowledge," Emma's question cut like a blade. "No," Hargrove replied firmly, "but with the knowledge of others who should have stopped it." When Frank began investigating, he uncovered a network extending into multiple agencies, defense contractors, and intelligence services. People who believed the next battlefield would be cognitive, not physical. "Mind control," Samuel Winters said from the doorway where he had appeared silently during the conversation. "Frank told me they were trying to develop scaled techniques that could be deployed through normal social channels. Media education peer groups." Hargrove nodded solemnly. "The perfect weapons don't destroy infrastructure or require occupation forces. They simply reshape how people perceive reality and what behaviors they consider acceptable. Frank called it compliance without awareness. And you expect us to believe you weren't part of it? Emma's skepticism was palpable. I expect nothing, Miss Reynolds. I'm here because your actions have exposed one operational node of a network your grandfather died trying to dismantle. The FBI has Blackwood and his immediate associates, but the architects remain untouched. Frank would have wanted you to know what you're really facing. Emma studied him with the penetrating assessment Jake had come to recognize, weighing variables, calculating probabilities, formulating contingencies. You have names, locations, operational details. It wasn't a question, but Hargrove nodded anyway. I've spent 7 years quietly continuing Frank's investigation, gathering evidence, identifying key personnel, mapping the network. I couldn't move openly without alerting them. But you, a hint of admiration entered his voice. They never saw coming. The granddaughter Blackwood thought he had neutralized by killing her trainer became his downfall. Frank's final strategy, Samuel said softly. He knew they'd target him eventually. Trained Emma not just in combat, but in deep cover operations. Planted the seeds for the mission she'd complete years later. Hargrove removed a small device from his pocket, a secure drive similar to the one Emma had given Hunter for extracting Blackwood's video journals. Everything I've gathered is here. Names, operational sites, funding channels. I'm providing it to you rather than directly to the FBI because there are elements within federal agencies who would ensure it never reached the proper authorities. Emma made no move to take the drive. Verification protocol. The Admiral's expression softened slightly. Frank called you his little ghost because you could move through his training courses without making a sound. He gave you your first tactical knife on your 10th birthday, a K-bar with your initials engraved on the hilt. And the last thing he told you before his final deployment was that shadows have power when they move with purpose. Something flickered in Emma's eyes, the faintest hint of emotion breaking through her tactical facade. These were details no one could know except someone who had truly known Frank Reynolds and his relationship with his granddaughter. She accepted the drive with a single nod. What do you gain from this, Admiral? Redemption, perhaps? Hargrove straightened his already perfect posture. I failed Frank 7 years ago by not recognizing the warning signs soon enough. I won't fail his legacy now. There are still good people in the intelligence community, Miss Reynolds. People who believe psychological warfare techniques should protect Americans, not be used against them. After Hargrove departed, Emma, Jake, and Samuel gathered around the kitchen table, the secure drive sitting untouched between them. Could be legitimate, Samuel acknowledged. Hargrove was always straight with Frank from what I heard. One of the few brass who came up through the teams instead of Annapolis. Could also be containment, Emma countered, providing controlled information to redirect our investigation away from elements they want to protect. Jake studied the drive. Either way, it contains intelligence we don't currently have. The question is how to verify it without exposing ourselves to potential counter-operations. Emma nodded, the ghost of approval crossing her face at his tactical assessment. We need a secure, isolated system for initial analysis. NOAA can establish appropriate protocols. She pocketed the drive. Until then, we maintain current operational security. Trust verification, not assumption. As they prepared to examine Hargrove's intelligence, none of them noticed the unmarked van parked 3 blocks away where technicians monitored directional microphones pointed at the Reynolds' residence. Nor did they detect the long-range surveillance camera capturing their movements through windows or the thermal imaging tracking their positions within the house. Inside the van, a man in a nondescript suit listened to the conversation through headphones, his expression unreadable. "Ghost Girl is in possession of the package," he reported into a secure line. "Admiral Hargrove has made contact as instructed, monitoring continued analysis and response patterns." On the other end of the line, a voice responded with clinical detachment. "Excellent. Proceed with Phase 2 assessment. The Reynolds subject continues to display exceptional tactical adaptability. Her response to controlled intelligence insertion will provide valuable data for refined protocols." The observation continued through the night as Emma and her allies began the careful process of analyzing Hargrove's information, unaware they were now subjects in a higher-level operation than even they had anticipated. Noah Jang's bedroom had been transformed into a secure digital fortress. The once nervous sophomore who had helped Emma hack the school's security system now directed multiple monitoring systems with growing confidence. His parents, initially shocked by his involvement in exposing Project Phoenix, had embraced his newfound purpose with cautious pride. "Air-gapped system ready," Noah reported, indicating a laptop with no wireless capabilities. "We can analyze the drive's contents without risk of remote access or tracking." Emma nodded approval. "Proceed with staged examination. Level 1 surface scan first, then content verification against known Phoenix parameters." Jake watched from the doorway, still adjusting to the specialized language that had developed between Emma and her closest allies. Over the past week, what had begun as exposure of a school bullying operation had evolved into something that resembled a military intelligence operation. Noah with his technical expertise, Samuel with his veteran's perspective, and Emma with her tactical command presence formed the core, with Jake, Lisa Mitchell, and others providing support functions. The secure drive's contents gradually revealed themselves on Noah's screens: thousands of documents, classified reports, personnel files, and operational directives spanning 3 decades. Project Chimera's evolution from defensive training to offensive application unfolded before them, with Phoenix representing only its most recent incarnation. "It's bigger than we thought," Samuel muttered, reviewing a budget document showing billions in classified funding. "Multiple agencies, private contractors, research universities. They've been refining these techniques since the Cold War." Emma studied a map displaying operational sites across the country, specialized facilities disguised as medical centers, educational institutions, and corporate research parks. 17 primary nodes each with regional testing grounds. Oak Ridge was just one small deployment area in the Pacific Northwest cluster. "Hargrove's intelligence appears legitimate," Noah confirmed, cross-referencing against their existing evidence. "Details align with what we've uncovered independently, but extend much further up the chain of command." Too legitimate, Jake wondered aloud. Why would someone at Hargrove's level provide this level of classified intelligence to teenagers? Emma's eyes narrowed slightly, the only indication that his question had struck a significant point. Tactical assessment suggests 3 possibilities. 1, Hargrove is genuinely continuing my grandfather's mission and sees us as the only viable channel given internal compromises. 2, this is controlled intelligence designed to direct our investigation toward specific targets while protecting others. 3, we're being evaluated. Evaluated? Noah looked up from his screens. For what? Response patterns, problem-solving methodologies, threat assessment capabilities. Emma's voice remained clinically detached. Remember that Phoenix evolved from Chimera, which began as a program to identify and train exceptional tactical minds. My grandfather was one of their original subjects before becoming an instructor. A chill settled over the room as the implications became clear. Jake remembered Chen's words about programmable assets and graduated subjects being placed in strategic positions. You think they're recruiting, he realized, using this whole situation to identify potential operators for whatever comes after Phoenix. Emma neither confirmed nor denied her focus remaining on the intelligence before them. Continue analysis, Noah. Prioritize operational chain of command and current deployment status. As Noah worked, Emma stepped outside with Jake and Samuel, ensuring they couldn't be overheard by any potential surveillance. We need to assume we're being monitored, she said quietly. All communications, all movements. The intelligence Hargrove provided is too comprehensive, too conveniently packaged. Trojan horse, Samuel suggested. Get us looking where they want while they assess our capabilities. Precisely, which means we use it accordingly. Emma's tactical mind was already formulating counter-strategies. We follow the intelligence trail, openly focusing on elements they've clearly included for our discovery. Meanwhile, we establish a secondary investigation through channels they won't anticipate. Lisa's father, Jake realized. Sheriff Mitchell. He was compromised by Blackwood, but knows the local operation better than anyone. Emma nodded once, approval flickering in her eyes. His daughter's involvement gives us leverage. His knowledge of regional Phoenix operations provides intelligence they don't expect us to access. What about Hargrove himself? Samuel asked. If he's manipulating us, he's dangerous. If he's legitimate, he's a crucial ally. We maintain operational ambiguity, Emma decided. Proceed as if his intelligence is valid, but potentially incomplete or misdirected. Our response will either confirm his legitimacy or reveal his actual objectives. The tactical discussion continued with Emma outlining contingencies and response protocols with the precision her grandfather had instilled in her. What none of them realized was that their assumption of surveillance was correct, but the monitoring extended far beyond the unmarked van that had since relocated to a position near Noah's house. Satellite systems tracked their movements throughout Oak Ridge. Digital intrusion tools monitored all electronic communications despite Noah's precautions, and behavioral analysis algorithms evaluated every decision, every tactical choice, every problem-solving approach against parameters established decades earlier under Project Chimera. The ghost girl who had hidden in plain sight for 3 years was now visible to systems and operators whose existence she had only begun to comprehend. The following day at school, Emma initiated the next phase of her counter-strategy. During lunch period, she approached Lisa Mitchell in the cafeteria, their first public interaction since the Phoenix exposure. Your father resisted Blackwood's initial attempts at recruitment, Emma stated without preamble, sliding into the seat across from the sheriff's daughter. Only after they targeted you did he begin cooperating. Lisa glanced around nervously before responding. How did you know? Pattern recognition. The timeline of his behavioral shift coincides precisely with your targeting by Dylan. Classic leverage application threatened the subject's family to ensure compliance. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she set down her fork. Dad told me everything last night. How they used what happened to me to force him to look the other way. How Blackwood had videos of Dylan's sessions with me that would be released if he didn't cooperate. Your father has critical intelligence about regional Phoenix operations, Emma continued. Transportation protocols, secure facilities, personnel rotation patterns. We need that information. Why not ask the FBI agent Chen seems to trust you? Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. Federal agencies are compromised at levels we haven't yet identified. We need independent verification channels. After a moment's hesitation, Lisa nodded. Dad wants to make things right. He's been keeping his own records since they forced him to cooperate. Says it was his insurance policy. Bring whatever he's willing to share to Samuel's gas station. 1,800 hours today. No electronic copies, no digital transfers. As Emma rose to leave, Lisa caught her wrist, the first time anyone at school had dared to touch her since the cafeteria incident with Dylan. "Emma, thank you for what you did. Not just exposing them, but for documenting what happened to all of us when no one would believe us." For a brief moment, Emma's tactical mask slipped, revealing the 17-year-old girl beneath someone who understood suffering and isolation firsthand. "That's what ghosts do, Lisa. We see everything because no one sees us." The moment passed quickly, tactical discipline reasserting itself as Emma moved through the cafeteria with her characteristic precision. Jake, watching from across the room, recognized both the strategic purpose of the public meeting with Lisa and the momentary humanity that had broken through Emma's carefully maintained facade. That evening, Sheriff Mitchell arrived at Samuel's gas station in an unmarked personal vehicle out of uniform and visibly tense. The man who had once been Oak Ridge's confident law enforcement leader now moved with the cautious demeanor of someone who had discovered the extent of his own compromise. "I should have come forward sooner," Mitchell said without preamble as Emma, Jake, and Samuel gathered in the garage bay. "When they first approached me 3 years ago, I told them to go to hell. Then Lisa became Dylan's primary target, and they showed me exactly what would happen if I didn't cooperate." He placed a thick manila envelope on the workbench. "This is everything I've documented. Transport schedules for subjects moved between facilities, security protocols, personnel rosters. I kept it as insurance, thinking someday I might find a way out." His weathered face carried the haunted look of a man who had betrayed his own principles. Never thought it would be a 17-year-old girl who'd bring the whole thing down. Emma examined the contents with methodical thoroughness. These transport logs include destinations beyond the 17 known Phoenix nodes. Mitchell nodded grimly. "That's why I wanted you to have this directly. Blackwood's operation was just one branch. The Phase 3 sites are where the successfully processed subjects are placed. Military installations, political offices, media organizations, technology companies. Long-term deep-cover assets conditioned to respond to specific triggers." "Sleeper agents?" Samuel translated his expression, darkening. "Not like in the movies," Mitchell clarified. "They don't activate and suddenly become assassins. The conditioning is subtler: influence operations, perception management, targeted disruption of specific systems or organizations. Some subjects don't even know they've been programmed." Jake studied a map showing the distribution of graduated assets across key sectors. "This is beyond psychological warfare. It's social engineering on a national scale." "That was always the ultimate objective," Emma said, her voice flat. "My grandfather's notes referenced population management protocols developed under Chimera, methods to shape public perception and behavior without overt control mechanisms." Mitchell's face showed a mixture of shame and determination. "I'm prepared to testify to everything I know. The FBI has offered witness protection for me and Lisa." "That may be premature," Emma cautioned. "We still haven't identified the operational apex of the Phoenix network. Testifying now may alert elements we haven't yet located." The sheriff looked at her with newfound respect. "Frank would be proud of you, Emma. He tried to warn me about all this before he died. Said there were people using his combat psychology training for something it was never meant for." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't listen. Thought he was just a paranoid old war horse. By the time I realized he was right, he was already gone." As they continued analyzing Mitchell's intelligence, a more complete picture of Project Phoenix emerged. What had begun as a localized operation in Oak Ridge was revealed as part of a sophisticated nationwide network dedicated to developing and deploying psychological influence techniques at both individual and societal levels. The implications were staggering. If Mitchell's documentation was accurate, there were hundreds of processed subjects already placed in positions throughout government, military, media, and corporate sectors, individuals subtly conditioned to advance specific agendas without conscious awareness of their programming. "This is why my grandfather was killed," Emma concluded, assembling the fragments into a coherent operational picture. Not just because he discovered Phoenix, but because he recognized its true purpose. The school bullying program wasn't the objective. It was the testing ground for techniques meant for much broader application. Jake felt a chill at the scale of what they were uncovering. How do we even begin to counter something this extensive? Emma's expression remained impassive, but her eyes held the cold determination Jake had come to recognize as her combat readiness. The same way any intelligence operation is disrupted, identify the command structure, locate their secure communications, and expose their methodology to those they seek to influence. She turned to Sheriff Mitchell. These transport logs indicate a regional coordination center at Mount Hood Research Station. What can you tell us about it? Mitchell tensed visibly. That's their crown jewel in the Northwest. Supposed to be a DARPA neuroscience research facility, but the lower levels house the regional Phoenix Command Center. I've only transported subjects to the perimeter checkpoint, never inside. Security is military-grade biometric access only. That's our next target, Emma decided. The Regional Command Center will have direct communications with the operational apex. If we can access their systems, we can identify the leadership structure behind Phoenix. Samuel looked alarmed. Emma, that's a bridge too far. We're talking about a secure government facility with armed guards and classified clearance requirements. This isn't high school security cameras anymore. No direct penetration, she clarified. Remote access through their external communication systems. NOAA can establish the necessary protocols. She turned to Mitchell. We need perimeter reconnaissance, security rotation patterns, communications, frequency analysis, external access points. The sheriff hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. I can provide what I know, but Emma, this is moving beyond exposing illegal experimentation into potential federal offenses. You're talking about hacking a government research facility. I'm talking about completing my grandfather's mission, she replied with quiet intensity. He died trying to expose a program that uses American citizens as psychological test subjects without consent, that conditions people to respond to triggers they don't even recognize, that places programmed assets throughout critical infrastructure. Her voice remained controlled, but beneath it ran a current of steel. If that mission requires accessing systems they've deliberately shielded from oversight, then that's what we'll do. The determination in her voice silenced further objections. Mitchell provided what information he had about the Mount Hood facility, and Emma began formulating a strategy that would allow them to penetrate its digital defenses without physical presence. As they worked into the night, the surveillance team monitoring them reported each development to their superiors. In a secure conference room thousands of miles away, high-ranking officials from military intelligence and civilian agencies watched the intelligence gathering in real time. The Reynolds subject continues to exceed operational parameters, noted one observer reviewing behavioral analytics displayed on a monitor. Her tactical adaptability and strategic cognition scores are unprecedented for her age group. As were her grandfather's, replied another older figure whose face remained in shadow. Frank Reynolds was our most promising chimera candidate before his ethical concerns emerged. The genetic correlation is statistically significant. She's identified the Mount Hood facility faster than projected, a third voice observed. Hargrove's intelligence package was supposed to direct her toward the Virginia node first. Adaptive problem-solving, the shadowed figure commented with what sounded like satisfaction. She's not following the predicted response pattern because she's identified the artificial construct. Extraordinary threat recognition capabilities. She's becoming a security risk, the first observer warned. Her investigation is approaching classified domains beyond Phoenix parameters. No, the shadowed figure contradicted. She's becoming exactly what Phoenix was designed to identify: a next-generation tactical mind capable of recognizing and countering adaptive psychological warfare. The perfect graduate of a program she doesn't even realize she's completing. The monitors continued displaying Emma's movements and strategies as she methodically dismantled the very operation that had been monitoring her development for years, unaware that her tactical evolution was itself the ultimate objective of a program far more sophisticated than even she had calculated. In Oak Ridge, as the first light of dawn broke over the mountains, Emma finalized her plan to penetrate the Mount Hood Research Station's digital security. Noah would establish a passive intercept of their external communications using parameters identified from Sheriff Mitchell's transport logs. Jake and Samuel would conduct remote surveillance of the facility's perimeter, cataloging security patterns without direct engagement. As they prepared to depart, Emma paused at the garage door, her attention caught by something outside. Without explanation, she stepped into the pre-dawn darkness, scanning the street with practiced precision. After a moment, she returned, her expression unchanged, but her posture subtly altered the combat readiness Jake had learned to recognize. "We're being watched," she stated simply. "Northern perimeter directional surveillance equipment, likely in place since Hargrove's visit." Samuel instinctively moved away from windows. "Federal Phoenix remnants." "Neither," Emma replied with cold certainty. "Different operational signature. This is something else entirely." She considered for a moment, tactical calculations visible in her eyes. "Proceed with planned operations, but implement echo protocols. Full communications blackout, predetermined rendezvous only." Jake recognized the shift in her demeanor. Not fear, but the heightened focus of someone who had identified a new threat dimension. "You think Hargrove's intelligence was compromised?" "I think Hargrove's intelligence was designed to observe our response patterns." She gathered her equipment with practiced efficiency. "We're not just investigating Phoenix anymore. We're being evaluated by whatever comes after it." Sheriff Mitchell looked between them, his face pale. "What does that mean?" Emma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a cold recognition of something larger than any of them had anticipated. "It means my grandfather's mission is more critical than even he realized. Phoenix isn't just a rogue program, it's a screening mechanism for identifying specific cognitive and tactical profiles." She shouldered her pack, checking sight lines through windows before continuing. "And we've just graduated to the next level of whatever game they're playing." As they separated to execute their assigned tasks, Emma moved through the shadowed streets of Oak Ridge with the ghost-like quality that had earned her nickname years before. But now, she wasn't hiding from high school bullies or documenting psychological experiments. She was engaged in a counterintelligence operation against unknown observers who had been monitoring her development since her grandfather's death, players in a game whose true rules she was only beginning to comprehend. The Ghost Girl had become visible to forces beyond Phoenix, and the shadows she had used for protection were now illuminated by attention from levels of power she had yet to identify. As dawn broke over the dying lumber town, Emma Reynolds stepped fully into the mission her grandfather had prepared her for, facing not just the enemies she had uncovered, but the watchful eyes of those who had been evaluating her capacity to find them all along. Sheriff Mitchell watched her disappear into the morning mist with a grim expression. "God help them," he muttered to Samuel. That girl isn't just Frank's granddaughter. She's what he was trying to create, someone who could fight a war most people don't even know exists. Samuel nodded slowly, his weathered face solemn. And God help her, because now they know exactly what she can do. Morning mist clung to the pine-covered slopes of Mount Hood as Jake and Samuel positioned themselves on a ridge overlooking the research facility. Through high-powered binoculars, the complex appeared innocuous, a cluster of modern buildings with minimal external security visible, matching its cover as a civilian neuroscience research station. Only someone with knowledge of its true purpose would notice the subtle indicators of military-grade protection. The patterns of security personnel movements, the disguised sensor arrays, the carefully structured sight lines that eliminated blind spots. 3 perimeter checkpoints, Samuel noted, making marks on a topographical map. Vehicle approaches only from the main access road, personnel rotations every 2 hours, no civilian traffic. Jake focused his binoculars on the communications array atop the central building. Satellite uplink microwave transmission dishes aimed southeast and northwest, multiple redundant systems. Frank taught me to look for what isn't visible, Samuel said, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the facility. What I don't see are standard research activities. No supply deliveries, no visiting scientists, no normal workplace patterns. This isn't a functioning research facility. It's an operational center, disguised as one. They continued their surveillance for 3 hours, documenting security protocols and communication systems without detection. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in Oak Ridge, Noah Jang had established a passive intercept of the facility's external transmissions using parameters Emma had defined with mathematical precision. Emma herself had disappeared before dawn, her destination disclosed to no one, a tactical precaution against the surveillance she had detected. Her instructions had been explicit: document everything, transmit nothing, maintain scheduled rendezvous protocols. They were now operating under the assumption that all electronic communications were compromised, all movements potentially monitored. At precisely noon, Jake and Samuel departed their observation post, leaving no trace of their presence. The drive back to Oak Ridge followed a circuitous route designed to reveal any surveillance, a technique Emma had adapted from her grandfather's counterintelligence training. "We're being followed," Samuel announced calmly after their third deliberate detour. "Black SUV government plates, 2 occupants, maintaining precise distance." Jake checked the side mirror. "They're not trying to hide it." "No," the old veteran agreed. "They want us to know we're being watched." Classic intimidation technique. They proceeded to the predetermined rendezvous point, not Samuel's gas station, which they now considered compromised, but an abandoned fire lookout tower deep in the national forest. The dilapidated structure had been one of Frank Reynolds's auxiliary safe locations, its existence documented in the journals Emma had recovered from his bunker. Noah arrived first, having taken a hiking trail inaccessible to vehicles. The nervous sophomore had grown more confident in recent days, his technological expertise providing a crucial component of their operation. He had established a makeshift command center in the lookout tower using battery-powered equipment and hand-cranked generators to avoid detectable power signatures. "I've got something," he announced as Jake and Samuel climbed the weathered wooden stairs. "Intercepted communications from the Mount Hood facility. Encrypted, but I managed to isolate repeating patterns in the transmission protocol." "What kind of patterns?" Samuel asked, examining the data scrolling across Noah's screen. "It's like a pulse, regular intervals, specific duration. Not random noise, deliberate signaling." Noah's fingers danced across the keyboard. "I think they're activation codes. Triggers for the conditioned subjects Sheriff Mitchell described." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Can you track who's receiving them?" Not specifically, but I can map general signal distribution. Noah pulled up a digital map of the Pacific Northwest, illuminated with spreading clusters of light. They're broadcasting to major population centers, primarily targeting communications infrastructure, media outlets, and government facilities. Activation protocols, Samuel muttered. They're mobilizing their assets. But why now, Jake wondered. Is it because of what we've exposed? No, came Emma's voice from the stairway. She appeared silently, as was her habit, moving with the fluid economy that marked her as Frank Reynolds' student. They're not responding to us. They're implementing the next phase of whatever Operation Phoenix was preparing for. She joined them at the monitoring station, scanning Noah's data with practiced efficiency. The pattern matches deployment protocols referenced in Hargrove's intelligence. Phase 3, Activation Coordinated Influence Operations across multiple sectors. English, Emma, Samuel prompted. What are they actually doing? Executing a synchronized alteration of information flow. She explained, her voice clinically detached. Subtle modifications to news reporting, social media algorithms, public communications. Not obvious censorship or propaganda, precision adjustments to perception thresholds. Changing how people process and respond to specific information without realizing they're being influenced. Mind control, Jake said flatly. Perception management, Emma corrected. More effective because it operates below conscious awareness. The subjects aren't controlled, they're nudged, their cognitive frameworks subtly restructured through thousands of micro-adjustments. She indicated the spreading signal pattern on Noah's map. This isn't activation of individual sleeper agents. It's activation of a system designed to reshape public response patterns. The implications settled over them like a shadow. What they had uncovered wasn't just illegal experimentation or localized psychological operations, it was the implementation of a long-developed capability to influence mass perception at a fundamental level. We need to disrupt the transmission source, Emma decided, studying the facility schematics they had compiled. Noah, can you identify the primary signal origin point within the Mount Hood complex? Already triangulated, he confirmed, highlighting a section of the central building. Lower level 3 northeast quadrant. That's where the broadcast originates. We can't just walk in there, Samuel objected. That place has military-grade security, and now we know they're aware of us. We don't need physical access, Emma countered. We need signal interruption. Noah, prepare a jamming protocol focused on their transmission frequencies. Jake, contact Agent Chen, secure line only, in-person meeting. She needs to know what's happening, but assume all electronic communications with federal agencies are compromised. As they mobilized to execute her directives, Emma moved to the lookout tower's observation platform. The panoramic view revealed miles of Oregon forest land, with Mount Hood rising majestically in the distance, beautiful, serene, and concealing within its shadow, an operation designed to reshape American society through invisible influence. Her hand moved unconsciously to her grandfather's dog tags, thumb tracing the embossed letters that had become a centering ritual during tactical planning. Frank Reynolds had identified this threat 7 years ago, had died trying to expose it, and had prepared his granddaughter to complete the mission he couldn't finish. I need to see Hunter Matthews, she announced when she returned inside. He knows something about his father's operation that he hasn't shared, something critical about the activation protocols. Hunter's under protective custody, Jake reminded her. FBI safe house location classified. Lisa knows, Emma replied simply. Sheriff Mitchell would have ensured he could maintain contact. Family leverage was how they controlled him. Initially, he wouldn't leave that vulnerability open again. Jake studied her face, recognizing the focused calculation that preceded decisive action. "What are you planning?" Hunter was being groomed as Dylan's replacement. He resisted the behavioral conditioning, but he was still exposed to the methodologies, the triggers, the operational objectives. Emma's eyes held the cold determination he had come to recognize as her combat readiness. He knows what Phase 3 actually targets, what they're trying to achieve with this mass activation. "And you think he'll tell you?" "He'll tell me," Emma confirmed without elaboration. The certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. The FBI safe house was a nondescript cabin 20 miles from Oak Ridge, situated on a private road with excellent sight lines and minimal approach vectors, a location selected for defensive purposes rather than comfort. 2 agents monitored the perimeter, while Hunter Matthews and his maternal aunt lived inside, ostensibly protected from potential retaliation by Phoenix operatives still at large. What the FBI hadn't considered was the ghost girl who had spent years moving undetected through hostile territory. Emma approached after nightfall using terrain features and wind direction to mask her movement. The tactical infiltration techniques her grandfather had taught her, originally developed for special operations in hostile environments, proved equally effective against federal agents who weren't expecting a 17-year-old to employ military-grade approach tactics. She bypassed the perimeter sensors by moving through the creek that fed the property, the cold water masking her thermal signature. 20 minutes of patient maneuvering brought her to the cabin's rear entrance, where she timed her movement to coincide with the security sweep pattern she had observed. Hunter Matthews was alone in his bedroom, leafing through a dog-eared copy of The Catcher in the Rye, when Emma silently materialized by his window. To his credit, he didn't cry out, just stared wide-eyed as she eased the window open and slipped inside with practiced efficiency. "Jesus, Emma," he whispered, glancing nervously at his closed bedroom door. "There are FBI agents right outside." "I know," she replied, her voice barely audible. "They're good at what they do, but my grandfather taught me how to move through places I'm not supposed to be." Hunter set his book aside, studying her with the nervous intensity that characterized all his interactions. At 14, he was physically nothing like his imposing older brother, smaller, slighter, with intelligent eyes that carried shadows of what he had witnessed in his father's household. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though without conviction. "They told me to avoid all outside contact. Dad still has people who could—" "Your father's network is active," Emma interrupted, cutting to the tactical objective. "Phase 3 protocols have been initiated from the Mount Hood facility. I need to know what they're targeting Hunter, what the actual objective is." The boy paled visibly, his hands beginning to tremble. "How do you know about Phase 3? No one is supposed to know about that. Dad said it was the most classified aspect of the entire program." "I know, because I've spent 3 years documenting everything about Phoenix, and because Admiral Hargrove provided additional intelligence, and because Noah Jang has intercepted the activation signals being broadcast across the Pacific Northwest." Emma's voice remained calm, measured. "But I don't know what the signals are designed to trigger." "You do." Hunter's eyes darted to the door again, then back to Emma. "I don't know the technical details. Dad never trusted me with the operational specifics after he realized I wasn't compatible with the program. But you heard things, overheard conversations, saw documents. Your father discussed the ultimate objective with Dylan." Emma moved closer, her intensity focused like a laser. "What is Phase 3 designed to accomplish, Hunter?" The younger Matthews boy seemed to collapse inward, shoulders hunching as if under physical pressure. "It's not what most people think. Not direct control or propaganda. It's subtler." He took a shaky breath. Dad called it preference cascades, altering how people process and prioritize information, especially about specific topics. Which topics? That's what scared me the most. It wasn't about politics, not directly. It was about trust. Who people trust, what sources they consider reliable, what kinds of authority they respond to. Hunter's voice dropped even lower. They've been conditioning response patterns for years through the test subjects, measuring how information format affects belief systems, how emotional triggers can override factual processing, how certain presentation methods can bypass critical analysis. Emma absorbed this, connecting it to patterns she had already identified. They're activating a system to reshape public trust architecture, undermining certain information sources while enhancing receptivity to others. Hunter nodded miserably. Dad said it was the perfect weapon because people would never know they were being influenced. They'd think they were making independent judgments while actually responding to carefully engineered prompts designed to bypass their normal evaluation systems. And the Phoenix subjects were the test cases. Not just test cases, distribution nodes. Hunter's technical understanding surprised Emma. The successfully processed subjects don't just respond to the triggers themselves, they amplify them through their social networks, workplaces, and communities. Dad called it cognitive contagion. The triggered responses spread outward, influencing others who weren't directly conditioned. The tactical implications crystallized in Emma's mind with cold clarity. What they were facing wasn't just a psychological operation, but a carefully engineered system for cascading influence through entire populations using processed subjects as transmission vectors for altered perception patterns. There's more. Hunter continued, his voice barely audible now. Phase 3 isn't the end. It's preparation for Phase 4, what Dad called preference consolidation. Once they've established the altered trust patterns, they can introduce specific narrative frameworks that people will accept without the normal evaluation filters. To what end? Hunter shook his head. Dad wasn't told. The Phoenix directors kept the ultimate objectives compartmentalized. He only knew his part, developing and testing the methodology, proving it worked on the subjects at Oak Ridge and the other schools. Emma processed this information with methodical thoroughness, fitting it into the operational picture she had been assembling. The activation signals Noah had detected weren't weapons themselves, but preparatory measures adjusting cognitive receptivity across population centers to prepare for whatever message would follow. I need access to your father's secure communications, she decided, the ones between him and the Phoenix directors. You can't get those, Hunter objected. They were kept on an air-gapped system in his private office at Riverdale. The FBI has the facility locked down. The FBI doesn't know what to look for, Emma countered. I do, and you're going to help me by telling them exactly where to find it. By the time Emma departed as silently as she had arrived, she had extracted detailed information about Nathan Blackwood's secure communication protocols, physical storage locations, and the encryption methods used to protect the most sensitive Phoenix directives. Hunter had provided this intelligence willingly, his initial resistance crumbling under the weight of what he knew his father had helped create. Emma, he called softly as she prepared to slip back through the window. Dad always said there was someone his bosses feared more than anything. Someone who understood what they were doing and had the capacity to stop it. Who? He never said a name, just referred to him as the Ghost Maker. Said he had trained people who could move through systems without being detected, who could dismantle operations from within. Hunter's eyes held a mixture of fear and hope. I think he meant your grandfather. Emma paused at the window, her expression unreadable in the darkness. My grandfather trained me to see what others miss, to move where others can't go, and to fight battles most people never know are happening. Her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone completing a mission long in preparation. If your father's bosses feared Frank Reynolds, they were right to do so. What they failed to calculate was that he wouldn't be fighting alone. She disappeared into the night, leaving Hunter Matthews staring at the open window, wind rustling the curtains, as the only evidence she had ever been there at all. The following morning, FBI tactical teams executed simultaneous raids on 3 locations identified in Hunter Matthews' statement, secure storage facilities where Nathan Blackwood had maintained redundant copies of Phoenix communications. Agent Sarah Chen personally supervised the operation at Riverdale Institute, focusing on the hidden compartment behind Blackwood's private office, where the most sensitive materials were secured. Jake, Noah, and Samuel monitored developments from their makeshift command center in the fire lookout tower. Emma had departed before dawn, her destination undisclosed, but her instructions explicit: analyze whatever the FBI recovered, continue monitoring the Mount Hood transmissions, and prepare countermeasures for signal disruption. Chen's team found something, Noah reported, monitoring the secure channel Emma had established with the FBI agent. Encrypted hard drives, dedicated communication devices. They're transporting everything to the Portland field office for analysis. Any sign of Emma? Jake asked, scanning the forest approaches for the 10th time that hour. Samuel shook his head. She's gone ghost. Standard protocol when moving in potentially compromised territory. But we're her team, Jake objected. We're supposed to have her back. Emma operates like Frank taught her, the old veteran explained. Solo infiltration, minimal communication, need-to-know parameters. If she hasn't shared her location, it's because knowing would create vulnerability. Jake recognized the tactical logic, but found himself increasingly concerned as hours passed without contact. Emma Reynolds had spent 3 years as the silent ghost girl, observing and documenting while remaining essentially alone. Even after assembling allies and exposing Phoenix, she retained the solitary operational mindset her grandfather had instilled in her. At mid-afternoon, Noah's monitoring equipment detected a significant change in the Mount Hood facility's transmission patterns. The signal's evolving, he reported, fingers flying across his keyboard. Frequency shifts, amplitude modulation, new encoding protocols. They're implementing the next stage of whatever they're broadcasting. Samuel studied the data with growing concern. Can you block it? Not completely. The transmission architecture is too sophisticated, adaptive routing frequency, hopping multiple redundant channels. Noah's expression reflected both professional admiration and personal dismay. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing. What's the coverage area? Jake asked, examining the digital map where signal distribution was displayed. Expanding. Initial broadcasts targeted specific nodes, media centers, government facilities, communications hubs. Now they're broadening to general population centers. And Noah highlighted spreading patterns across the Pacific Northwest. Portland, Seattle, Spokane, Boise. Major metropolitan areas, first then cascading outward. Jake remembered Hunter's description of cognitive contagion, the process by which conditioned responses would spread through social networks and communities. The visualization on Noah's screen showed exactly that pattern developing in real-time influence, radiating outward from key nodes, establishing coverage across entire regions. We need to warn people, he insisted. Tell them they're being influenced without knowing it. Warn them how? Samuel countered. The whole point of this system is that it operates below conscious awareness. You can't just tell people, don't be influenced by the invisible signals altering your perception preferences. That's not how it works. Then we disrupt the source, Jake decided. Cut off the head of the snake. Samuel's weathered face showed both approval and concern. That means the Mount Hood facility. Military-grade security classified operations, likely armed response protocols. We're talking about an action against a government installation. A corrupted government installation, Jake corrected. One running illegal psychological operations against American citizens. The distinction won't matter to the security personnel who shoot you for approaching the perimeter, Samuel observed dryly. Before Jake could respond, the lookout tower's proximity alarm activated a simple tripwire system Emma had installed to alert them of approaching visitors. They moved to defensive positions, Samuel retrieving the shotgun he kept secured beneath the observation platform, while Noah rapidly encrypted their monitoring data. "Single vehicle approaching," Samuel reported, peering through binoculars. "Government plates, 2 occupants." The black SUV that had followed them earlier parked at the base of the tower. 2 men emerged, both in their 50s, wearing the nondescript suits of federal agents, but carrying themselves with the distinctive posture of military training. "Special Agent Wilson, Department of Defense," the first man announced, displaying credentials as he approached the tower stairs. "We need to speak with Emma Reynolds." "Not here," Samuel called down, keeping the shotgun visible but not directly aimed. "And you boys are a long way from the Pentagon. What's your actual unit?" The men exchanged glances before the second one responded. "Special Projects Division, Defense Intelligence Agency. Our authorization comes directly from the Joint Chiefs. This is a matter of national security." "Funny thing about national security," Samuel replied, his Desert Storm experience evident in his unflinching stance. "It gets used to cover all manner of sins against the very people it's supposed to protect." "We're not here to debate policy, Mr. Winters," the first agent Wilson countered. "We need to locate Emma Reynolds before she takes action that could compromise critical defense systems." "What defense systems?" Jake demanded, joining Samuel at the railing. "The ones broadcasting psychological influence signals to American cities. The ones continuing a program that was officially terminated 30 years ago." Wilson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been monitoring the Mount Hood transmissions. That alone constitutes interference with classified operations. Operations that violate about 15 federal laws and the Constitution," Samuel shot back. "Phoenix wasn't authorized by Congress or any legitimate oversight body. It's a rogue program run by people who think reshaping American minds is an acceptable national defense strategy." The second agent stepped forward. "The situation is more complex than you understand, Mr. Winters. Project Phoenix evolved from legitimate defense research into cognitive security. The current deployment is a countermeasure against hostile foreign influence operations already targeting American information systems." "Convenient explanation," Jake observed. "Except we've seen Blackwood's files, the experimental protocols, the test subjects. This wasn't developed as a defensive system. It was designed from the ground up to reshape domestic perception patterns." "Regardless of its origins," Wilson interjected, "the system is currently the only effective defense against sophisticated foreign psychological operations targeting U.S. population centers. If Miss Reynolds disrupts these transmissions, she will be removing a critical protective measure at the worst possible time." "That's your story," Samuel's voice dripped with skepticism. "The illegal mind control program that killed Frank Reynolds and tortured hundreds of teenagers is actually saving America from foreign mind control. That's a tough sell, boys." The agent's demeanor shifted subtly, the diplomatic approach giving way to more direct pressure. "We're not asking permission, Mr. Winters. National security directives authorize us to locate and secure Emma Reynolds by any means necessary. She possesses classified information and operational capabilities that constitute a clear and present danger to critical infrastructure." "She possesses the truth," Jake countered, "about Phoenix, about what happened to her grandfather, about what's being done to American citizens without their knowledge or consent. The truth is more complicated than a 17-year-old girl can possibly understand, Wilson replied, his patience visibly thinning. Now, for the final time, where is Emma Reynolds? Samuel raised the shotgun slightly, not aiming, but ensuring it remained a visible deterrent. Not here, not coming here, and not your concern anymore. The FBI has Blackwood's files, the evidence of illegal experimentation, and enough documentation to shut down whatever you're running at Mount Hood. Go back to your bosses and tell them Frank Reynolds' mission is being completed, whether they like it or not. The standoff continued for several tense moments before Wilson finally nodded curtly. This isn't over. When you speak to Miss Reynolds, inform her that her actions have consequences beyond what she comprehends. There are factors at play that weren't in her grandfather's files or Blackwood's confession. As the agents departed, Noah emerged from the equipment room where he had been monitoring the encounter. "They're lying," he stated with unusual confidence. "I've been analyzing the Mount Hood transmission patterns against known foreign influence operations. There's no correlation. This isn't a defensive system, it's purely domestic in application." "They're getting desperate," Samuel observed, watching the SUV disappear down the forest road. "Throwing whatever justification they can find at the wall, hoping something sticks." Jake turned to Noah. "Can you track their vehicle? I want to know if they're really leaving or just repositioning." "Already on it," the young hacker confirmed, returning to his monitoring station. "I've got a satellite feed tracking their movement. They're heading back toward Portland." "For now," Samuel muttered. "But they'll be back with more men and better authorization. We need to move our operation before they return." As they began preparing to relocate, Jake couldn't shake the growing concern about Emma's absence. She had disappeared without explanation, pursuing some aspect of the mission she hadn't shared even with her closest allies. Whatever she was doing it alone, just as she had operated for the 3 silent years of her ghost existence. What none of them realized was that Emma Reynolds was no longer operating alone. She had made contact with the one person who understood the full scope of Phoenix better than anyone, the man who had helped design its earliest iterations before recognizing the moral corruption at its core. Admiral James Hargrove had not returned to Washington after providing his intelligence package. Instead, he had remained in Oregon, monitoring developments from a secure location and waiting for the ghost girl to recognize what her grandfather would have seen immediately, that the only way to truly dismantle Phoenix was to engage with its creators at the highest level. The Mount Hood Research Facility's security protocols shifted to heightened alert at precisely 7:32 p.m. External perimeter checks doubled in frequency, automated defensive systems activated, and all non-essential personnel were evacuated via helicopter to alternate locations. To the surveillance satellites monitoring from orbit, the sudden increase in activity suggested a significant security breach or imminent threat. In reality, the facility was responding to a ghost that wasn't there. 50 miles away, in a secure room within the Portland Federal Building, Emma Reynolds sat beside Admiral James Hargrove, watching the Mount Hood reaction unfold on multiple monitors. Her expression remained impassive, but her eyes held the cold satisfaction of a tactician whose strategy was unfolding exactly as planned. "They've committed their resources to perimeter defense." Hargrove observed, his military experience evident in his assessment. "Exactly as you predicted." "Operational logic dictated their response," Emma replied. "The perceived threat aligned with their security protocols, triggering standard countermeasures." What Mount Hood's security team didn't know was that they were responding to a ghost infiltration, an elaborate digital mirage created using techniques Emma had adapted from her grandfather's Special Operations playbook. Noah's technical expertise, combined with Hargrove's knowledge of Phoenix security systems had allowed them to project the electronic signature of a breach without any physical presence. Agent Chen's team is in position, reported a FBI tactical coordinator from across the room. Awaiting your confirmation. Emma checked the operation timeline displayed on her tablet. The synchronized assault had been planned with military precision, multiple elements, moving in careful coordination, each unaware of the others until the critical moment. Execute Phase 1, she directed, her voice carrying the calm authority that had led hardened FBI agents and military veterans to accept strategic direction from a 17-year-old girl. On the monitors, satellite imagery showed FBI tactical teams approaching the Mount Hood facility from multiple vectors, using the forest cover to mask their advance. Meanwhile, in secure server rooms across the country, federal cybersecurity units initiated simultaneous penetration of Phoenix's digital infrastructure, targeting the 17 nodes identified in Blackwood's files. The operation Emma had designed wasn't just about shutting down the Mount Hood transmission center. It was about dismantling the entire Phoenix network in a single coordinated strike, leaving no opportunity for recovery or adaptation. Phoenix Command is attempting to establish emergency protocols, reported a NSA analyst who had been assigned to the operation after the president's national security advisor was briefed on the full scope of the unauthorized program. Isolated communications detected between senior operational directors. Intercept and preserve all transmissions, Emma instructed. Priority on command authorization codes and contingency directives. As the operation unfolded, Jake, Samuel, and Noah monitored from their relocated command post, now established in a secure area of the Portland Federal Building. They watched in amazement as Emma coordinated elements of military intelligence and law enforcement agencies with the precision her grandfather had instilled in her. She planned this from the beginning, Jake realized, observing her calm command presence. All those contingency scenarios she mapped out in the bunker, this was the endgame she was working toward. Frank would be proud, Samuel said softly, his weathered face reflecting both admiration and sadness. He trained her to finish what he started, and by God, she's doing exactly that. On the main operational display, the Mount Hood facility was now surrounded by FBI tactical teams. The Phoenix security personnel, having exhausted their defensive options against an enemy that wasn't physically present, now faced actual federal agents with legitimate authorization and overwhelming force. Phoenix Command has initiated emergency data purge protocols, the NSA analyst reported, attempting to erase operational records and command chains. Too late, Emma replied without emotion. Secured copies of all Phoenix directories were extracted during the initial breach simulation. We have their entire operational architecture, including Phase 4 deployment parameters. The room fell momentarily silent at this revelation. Emma had not just created a diversion, she had used the Phantom breach to extract the most sensitive Phoenix data before the actual raid began. It was a level of tactical sophistication that left even veteran intelligence operators impressed. Mount Hood facility secure, came the report from the FBI tactical commander. 27 personnel in custody, no casualties. Control center located on sub-level 3, as intel indicated. Emma nodded once, acknowledging the report without visible emotion. Transmission systems active but contained. No external broadcasts possible with our signal suppression in place. Proceed with Phase 2, she directed. Across the country, coordinated raids struck the remaining Phoenix nodes simultaneously, research facilities, communication centers, and operational headquarters disguised as private medical clinics or academic institutions. The program that had operated in shadows for decades was suddenly exposed to the harsh light of legitimate oversight. Its personnel detained, its systems locked down. In the Portland Command Center, Emma finally allowed herself a momentary pause. She had been operating at peak tactical focus for days, executing the endgame of a mission her grandfather had prepared her for since childhood. The physical and mental toll was evident only in the slight shadows beneath her eyes and the measured care with which she controlled each movement. Admiral Hargrove approached, offering a bottle of water, which she accepted with a nod of thanks. "You've done what your grandfather couldn't," he said quietly. "Phoenix is finished. The operational infrastructure is neutralized." Emma corrected, her tactical precision extending to her assessment. "But the institutional knowledge remains distributed among personnel we haven't identified. The methodologies have been documented and could be reconstituted. This isn't an ending, it's a containment action." Hargrove studied her with newfound respect. "Frank said you had the most natural tactical mind he'd ever encountered. Said you could see 3 moves ahead, where most people saw only the immediate action." Emma didn't respond to the praise, her focus already shifting to the next phase of operations. "We need to secure the Phase 4 protocols immediately. The activation signals were preparatory, designed to establish cognitive receptivity patterns for specific narrative frameworks. Those frameworks are the actual payload, and they still exist in Phoenix command systems." Before Hargrove could respond, an NSA analyst called for their attention. "We've identified unusual data traffic from a location not on our target list. Heavily encrypted using Phoenix protocols, but on channels we weren't monitoring." Emma moved immediately to the analyst's station, studying the data patterns with focused intensity. "Backup command node," she concluded. "Secondary control system designed to maintain operational continuity if primary nodes are compromised." She turned to Hargrove. "This wasn't in your intelligence package." The Admiral's expression darkened. "Because I didn't know about it. Phoenix evolved beyond even what I had access to." Emma was already redirecting resources, her tactical mind recalculating based on the new intelligence. "Trace the transmission origin. Priority override on all other operations. This is the actual Phoenix Command Center. What we've been targeting were operational nodes, not strategic control." As the intelligence teams raced to identify the new threat, Jake approached Emma, concern evident in his expression. "You've been running this operation for days without rest. Even you have limits." She met his gaze briefly, and for a moment he glimpsed the 17-year-old girl beneath the tactical commander, someone pushed to extraordinary limits by circumstances no teenager should ever face. "The mission isn't complete," she replied simply. "Rest comes after. Your grandfather would want you to maintain operational effectiveness," Samuel added, joining them. "Tactical discipline includes knowing when to rotate command." Before Emma could respond, the NSA analyst called out, "Location identified, signal origin traced to a private estate in Eastern Virginia. Property registered to a corporate entity with links to defense contractors associated with original Chimera funding." Emma's focus instantly returned to the tactical situation, personal considerations set aside. "That's it. Phoenix Actual. The control center directing everything we've been fighting." She turned to the FBI operational commander. "We need a tactical team on that location immediately." "Virginia is outside our operational jurisdiction for this action," the commander objected. "We'd need additional authorization from the Attorney General and possibly the President." Admiral Hargrove stepped forward. "I can get that authorization. The National Security Advisor is already briefed on Phoenix. When he understands we've identified the command center, he'll secure the necessary approvals." As Hargrove moved to establish the high-level communications, Emma returned to the operational displays, studying the data patterns with the calculated precision that had become her defining characteristic. The Phoenix network was more extensive and more sophisticated than even her grandfather had realized, a system designed not just to influence individuals, but to reshape the collective information processing of entire populations. What exactly were they planning? Jake asked quietly, standing beside her at the command console. What was the ultimate objective? Emma's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held the cold recognition of something darker than any of them had anticipated. Control without the appearance of control, she answered. A system capable of directing public perception and response patterns without visible coercion. The perfect weapon against a democratic society, one that doesn't destroy freedom, but subtly reshapes what people do with it. Mind control after all, Samuel muttered. No, Emma corrected. Something more insidious. Not controlling minds directly, but controlling the information architecture through which minds understand reality. Phoenix doesn't tell people what to think. It restructures how they process information so they reach pre-selected conclusions while believing they made independent judgments. The implications settled over them like a shadow. The recognition that what they were fighting wasn't just an illegal government program, but an assault on the fundamental cognitive liberty that democratic society required to function. As operations against the Virginia Command Center mobilized, Emma moved to a quieter corner of the command room, her hand unconsciously finding her grandfather's dog tags. For a brief moment, her tactical mask slipped, revealing the weight of the mission she had carried since his death. Frank Reynolds had recognized the threat Phoenix posed not just to individual minds, but to the collective decision-making capacity of an entire nation. He had died trying to expose it, and had trained his granddaughter to complete the mission he couldn't finish. "Almost there, Grandpa," she whispered too softly for anyone else to hear. "Almost there." The ghost girl, who had endured 3 years of silence while preparing for this moment, now stood at the center of a national security operation, dismantling the very system that had killed her grandfather. The shadows she had used for protection had become her strength, and the tactical discipline he had instilled in her had become the weapon that would complete his final mission. As the Virginia operation launched, Emma Reynolds returned to the command console, her face once more the impassive mask of tactical focus. The teenager who had been bullied and isolated had disappeared, replaced by the commander. Frank Reynolds had trained her to become someone capable of seeing the battles most people never knew were happening, and fighting them with a precision that left even hardened veterans in awe. The ghost had become visible at last, and in doing so had changed the course of a war most Americans never knew was being waged for control of their minds.